His name was Daniel Eze, and on the morning he walked into the national leadership selection, nobody knew it, nobody cared. He arrived alone, no manager beside him, no assistant carrying his bags, no expensive suit that screamed money. He wore a clean white shirt, dark trousers, and a pair of black shoes that had clearly seen a few years of use. He carried a small brown folder in his left hand, and nothing else. He looked like a man who had taken the wrong turn and ended up at the wrong event. The hall was enormous, high ceilings, marble floors that reflected the morning light like still water. Around him, the other candidates moved with the ease of people who belonged in expensive rooms. They wore sharp clothes. They laughed loudly with each other. They shook hands the way powerful people do, firm, quick, with eye contact that said, "I already know I will win." Their names were printed in thick, bold letters on the welcome boards near the entrance. Daniel's name was not on any of them. He walked to the registration desk quietly. The young woman behind the desk looked at his simple clothes, then at her list, then back at him. "Daniel Eze?" she said, as if she were checking that she had heard correctly. He nodded. She found his name near the very bottom of the list, drew a small tick beside it, and handed him a numbered badge without smiling. His number was 47. He was the last confirmed candidate. The national leadership selection happened every 5 years. It was the most respected competition in the country. 12 positions of national authority were awarded to the 12 candidates who performed best, across 3 weeks of rigorous testing. Intelligence assessments, public speaking rounds, crisis simulations, strategy presentations, and a final live evaluation in front of the country's most powerful decision-makers. Thousands of people applied every cycle. Only 50 were chosen to compete. Being selected to compete was itself an honor. Winning was something else entirely. Of the 50 candidates that year, 49 had university degrees from well-known institutions. 31 had already held positions of leadership in government or large organizations. 16 had been featured in national newspapers or magazines. 3 had written books. 1 had his own television program. Daniel had none of those things. He had grown up in a small city in the south of the country where the roads were broken and the electricity came and went like an untrustworthy friend. His father had driven a taxi. His mother had sold food at the roadside market every morning before sunrise. Daniel had studied in a school that had more students than chairs, where teachers sometimes did not come for days, and where the library held fewer than 200 books. He had read every single one of them. He had not gone to a famous university. He had studied through a local college, while working evenings at a printing shop. He had no famous family name. He had no person of influence who had made a call on his behalf. He had simply applied to the national leadership selection, passed the qualifying examination with one of the highest scores ever recorded, and been placed on the list, at the very bottom, as if even the list wanted to remind him of his position. The first day of the competition was an introduction and a general knowledge assessment. The candidates sat in a wide examination hall and answered questions for 4 hours. Daniel sat at desk number 47 and wrote without stopping. His hand moved steadily across the pages. He did not look up at the clock. He did not look sideways at his neighbors. He simply answered each question as completely and as clearly as he could, then moved to the next. When the results were posted that evening on the central board outside the main hall, a small crowd gathered. People pushed forward to find their names. There was laughter and celebration from those who had scored well. There was quiet disappointment from a few who had not. Daniel stood at the back of the crowd and waited until everyone else had looked and walked away. Then he stepped forward. He was in 3rd place. He read the number twice. He looked at his name. He looked at the number again. Then he turned around and walked back to his room without saying a word to anyone. But someone had noticed. A senior evaluator named Mrs. Adaeze Okonkwo had been standing to the side of the board when the results were posted. She had watched the other candidates react with noise and animation, and then she had watched a quiet man in a white shirt wait patiently, step forward, read his position, and leave without celebration. She did not know his name yet, but she remembered his face. The days that followed were not easy. The competition moved quickly. Every morning began at 6 with physical and mental exercises. Every afternoon held a different test or presentation. Every evening, candidates were given new materials to study for the following day. The pace was designed to be exhausting. Some candidates began to show the strain by the end of the first week. They became irritable, made small errors, grew careless in their answers. Daniel did not become careless. Each evening, when others sat in the common room comparing notes and discussing strategies, Daniel went to his room. He studied the materials for the next day. He reviewed his notes from the evaluations. He identified the areas where he had not performed as well as he wanted to, and spent time on those specific areas. He slept for exactly 7 hours. He woke before his alarm. He ate breakfast without distraction. He arrived at every session early enough to sit quietly for a few minutes before it began. He was not cold or unfriendly. When people spoke to him, he responded with warmth and attention. He listened well. He asked thoughtful questions. A few of the other candidates began to seek him out during meals, not because he was the most entertaining person in the room, but because when Daniel spoke, he said something worth hearing. He had the unusual quality of making the person he was speaking with feel like the most important person present. But most of the other candidates still did not take him seriously. His background was too ordinary. His credentials were too thin. There was a group of 5 leading candidates who had formed a quiet alliance. They sat together, studied together, and spoke of the final result as though it were simply a matter of which one of them would win. They referred to Daniel, when they referred to him at all, as the one from the bottom of the list. It was not said with cruelty. It was said with the easy dismissiveness of people who have never needed to look over their shoulder. The turning point came in the second week, during the crisis simulation exercise. The candidates were each placed in a room with a team of 4 people they had never met. They were given a detailed description of a national emergency, a breakdown in the supply of clean water to 6 major cities, combined with rising public unrest and conflicting reports from local officials. They had 90 minutes to assess the situation, form a response plan, assign roles to their team, and present their solution to a panel of 3 evaluators. It was the exercise that had broken the most candidates in previous years. Not because it was too complex, but because it required something most people under pressure forget to do: listen. The candidate in the room next to Daniel, a well-dressed man named Victor who had managed a regional government department for 12 years, spent the first 20 minutes talking. He laid out his plan quickly and confidently, assigned tasks to his team without asking for their input, and spent the remaining time polishing his presentation. His solution was technically sound. The evaluators gave him moderate marks. Daniel did something different. He spent the first 10 minutes asking his team questions. Simple, direct questions. What did each person know about water infrastructure? What had they seen work in similar situations? What did they think was the most urgent problem? He listened to every answer fully, without interrupting. 2 of his team members said things that genuinely changed his thinking. He incorporated their ideas into the plan, credited them by name during the presentation, and delivered a solution that was not just technically strong. It was practical, human, and real. When he finished, one of the evaluators, a man who had been part of the selection panel for 3 consecutive cycles, and who was known for never showing emotion, put his pen down and leaned forward slightly. He asked Daniel one follow-up question. Daniel answered it with calm precision. The evaluator nodded once and wrote something on his scoring sheet. The results of the crisis simulation were not posted publicly, but the evaluators talked among themselves. And within the competition, things talk. By the beginning of the 3rd week, Daniel Eze was no longer invisible. The other candidates began to notice his consistency. Not one extraordinary moment, but a sustained, quiet excellence that had been building since the first day. He was polite in every setting, but absolutely clear in every answer. He was never the loudest person in the room, but he was always the most prepared. He made no mistakes that could not be corrected. He never panicked. He never complained. The candidate who had been leading the competition since the first day was a woman named Grace Amara. She was brilliant, confident, and had the kind of natural leadership presence that made rooms go quiet when she entered. By week 3, she was the clear favorite. But even Grace, who did not alarm easily, had started watching Daniel more carefully. There was something in the way he moved through the competition that she could not ignore, a steadiness, a certainty without arrogance, that made him feel like a man who already knew something the rest of them did not. The final evaluation was held on a Friday. It was a live session in the main auditorium, open to invited observers, journalists, former winners, senior officials, and leaders from across the country. Each candidate had to stand at the front of the room and answer questions from a panel of 7 judges, without preparation, without notes, and without the ability to say, "I do not know." If a candidate did not know something, they were expected to say what they would do to find out, and why that was the right approach. The session lasted 8 hours across the full group of 50 candidates. By late afternoon, the auditorium was thick with quiet tension. Most of the observers had expected the final exchanges to be between the top 3 or 4 established names. But as the day moved forward, Daniel Eze had become impossible to ignore. When it was his turn, he walked to the front without hurry. He stood straight. He looked at the panel directly, but without aggression. He clasped his hands in front of him, relaxed, and waited for the first question. The questions came from all directions. They were not easy. They covered national policy, economic theory, community development, crisis management, historical precedent, and ethical decision-making. Some were designed to create contradiction, to catch a candidate saying one thing and then being forced to say another. Some were designed to be unanswerable, to see how a candidate responded when no clear answer existed. Daniel answered each question with a clarity that felt almost effortless. When he knew the answer, he gave it directly, without unnecessary words. When the question touched on genuine uncertainty, he said so, explained why the uncertainty existed, described what he would need to learn more before committing to a position, and then outlined the process by which he would make that decision. He was never evasive, he was never arrogant. He was simply honest, prepared, and precise. One of the judges, a woman with silver hair and 40 years of experience in national administration, asked him the final question of his session. "Mr. Eze," she said, "you came here without a famous name, without powerful connections, and without a history that anyone outside your hometown would recognize. What gave you the right to believe that you could stand in this room and lead this country?" The auditorium was silent. It was the kind of silence that happens when everyone in a room is holding their breath at the same moment. Daniel looked at her steadily. "Nothing gave me the right," he said. "Rights are not given in this room or in any room. They are earned. I came here because I have spent my entire life preparing to serve. Not because I was expected to arrive, but because the people I grew up around needed someone to represent them who actually understands what their lives look like. I do not have a famous name, but I know what it means to study by candlelight when the electricity fails. I know what it feels like to work twice as hard for half the recognition. I know what this country looks like from the bottom, and that is not a disadvantage. It is the most important qualification in this room." Nobody clapped. It was not a room where people clapped during proceedings, but something moved through the air. Something shifted. The silver-haired judge held his gaze for a long moment, then made a note on her sheet and said, "Thank you, Mr. Eze." The results were announced 2 days later, in a formal ceremony. 12 names were called. Daniel Eze's name was the 7th to be read. When it came, there was a beat of silence before the applause, the half-second of surprise that a room produces when something happens that it should have expected but did not. And then the applause came, full and genuine. He walked to the front of the room and accepted the official appointment certificate with both hands, the way his mother had always told him to accept something important, with both hands, completely, without holding anything back. In the weeks and months that followed, journalists wrote about him. Former candidates gave interviews about what it had been like to compete alongside him. The evaluators, in their official commentary on that cycle of the competition, noted that Daniel Eze had produced the most consistent performance across all 3 weeks that the selection had ever recorded. Not the highest single score, the most consistent. Every single day, from the first morning to the last afternoon, he had given everything he had. There had been no off days, no coast days, no days where he allowed himself to do less than his best. When a young reporter asked him, in his first interview after the results, what his secret was, he thought about it for a moment before answering. "I believed," he said, "before anyone else did." That is not arrogance. Arrogance is believing you deserve something without earning it. What I had was something different. I believed that if I prepared harder than anyone else, and showed up more honestly than anyone else, and refused to stop when things became difficult, then the result would follow. I did not know when. I did not know how, but I believed that it would come, and it did. The reporter asked him if there was a moment, during the competition, when he had almost stopped believing. Daniel was quiet for a few seconds. Then he nodded. There was one evening, he said, about halfway through the second week. I had received a lower score than I expected on one of the evaluations. I sat in my room that night, and I felt very small. I thought about the road I had come from. I thought about my mother waking up before sunrise to sell food. I thought about every person who had looked at me and seen someone not worth their attention, and I made a decision. He paused. I decided that I would not let those moments have the final word. I got up the next morning, and I worked harder than I had the day before, and the day after that, and the day after that. He stopped speaking. The reporter waited to see if there was more. There was not. There did not need to be, because the rest of it, every result, every moment, every name that now appeared beside his, said the rest for him. Daniel Eze had walked into that hall as the last name on the list, the candidate nobody expected, the man who did not belong in the room according to every measure that a room like that usually uses to judge belonging. He had walked out as something entirely different. Not the most celebrated, not the loudest, not the one with the longest list of credentials or the most impressive biography. Simply the best. And in the years that followed, whenever a young person from a small city, with a difficult background and no powerful name, sat down to fill out an application for something they were not sure they deserved, Daniel Eze's story was the one people told them. Not to promise them that it would be easy, but to show them that it was possible.